Hello, and thank you for joining me at the FireMonkey Firestarter session. My name is Jeff Lefebvre, and I'm the lead software developer at Skyline Aviation Software. This session will cover several topics for FireMonkey development. We will create an HD application with frames using embedded form objects, then integrate that project into a 3D environment, and then add some animation to the project. Finally, we will touch on some user experience considerations when developing with a rich user interface, such as FireMonkey. First, we will create a new FireMonkey HD application and create a T-rectangle. Now you may notice that there is also a T-layout available to you, but the main difference between the two and why I suggest T-rectangle is that T-rectangle supports some styling options, however the T-layout does not. So we will delete this. So we will have our T-rectangle, and then we'll add another T-rectangle within it. Think of a T-rectangle as like a panel. Now notice how I'm able to create T-rectangles within another T-rectangle. You could do this with panels, but you could do this with any component in FireMonkey. So we will set this first rectangle, or the second rectangle, to the top. And notice how I'm going to create a T-text component within it. Notice in the structure pane here we have a rectangle within another rectangle and then a text within them all. So we will set this text to the right side, and then we will set another text to the client. Feel free to look through the additional alignment options. There are simply too many to go through them all, but feel free to try them out. So I'll make this a little bigger. Alright, so here we have two text boxes within a rectangle within another rectangle. Finally, we will create a final T text with with the alignment to client. If you noticed, I used T text to add to my rectangles. However, another component that's available is T label. The difference between T label and T text is that T-text supports basic styling, which gives you fill and font, but T-label gives you more extensive styling by right-clicking it and going custom or default style. Setting the custom style will only set the style of the component that you have selected. However, setting the default style will set the style of that same component type across that entire form. We will set some basic styling here. We will set the font to be bold. To add effects to your FireMonkey application, you can use one of two methods. The first method is to select your effects at the right side and then clicking on the effect that you wish to put it on. Or you can select your component, and you can press F6 and then type in the effect that you wish to apply. Like that. To demonstrate the other method, you can click that and then click here. So we've added a shadow effect to a text box, which you cannot see yet. However, if we were to type some text here, you would notice that there's some shadowing on that. So for this demonstration, we will have some shadowing on the top rectangle. Developing frames in VCL is a little bit different than you would develop frames in FireMonkey. In VCL, you would have an explicit T-frame that you would create, and then you develop your user interface on that. However, in FireMonkey, there isn't really a T-frame capability. Instead, because you can embed objects within another, you can simply assign the parent of one component onto another, even though it's on a different form. First, we will need to save this form. And we'll create another one. little T rectangle here. And then we'll create a T button. So what we're going to do is that we're going to set the main form to be this new form. So same as before in VCL, select project options, forms, and we'll move that around. And we don't want this to be auto-created anymore, so we'll move it over to available. What we're going to do is we're going to create this form in design time. We'll create it when the form is created, and we will destroy the new form when the form is destroyed. So now to the button. All you have to do is set the form dot rectangle1 dot parent and set it to this rectangle. So as you can see, even though we designed a form, we can still treat it like a frame. But as you can see here, the form is not quite sizing to what a parent is. To fix this, all we have to do is set the rectangle alignment to client. And we'll make this a little bit more readable, so we'll call this rect message. We'll call it PNL message. And we'll call this PNL parent. When we recompile this and we press the button again, you'll notice that it is now aligned to the parent. In FireMonkey, list boxes are very flexible. You can use them to populate with simple strings, or you can go much further by adding custom components within it. To illustrate this, I'll create a new list box, set the alignment to right, and add 2 buttons. One button will be used to add, and the other button will be used to clear. Alright, so I've created some code that would manage some of this. Here it is, and it's essentially 3 different functions, which adds the items to the list, clears the lists, and populates the items with the text. Take our btn add, and we will add the items to the list, passing in the list box, and we will have the other button clear the list. So when we press add, you'll notice that we can add messages to the list and then clear the list off. Now let's go through what these functions actually do. The first procedure, add item to list, takes in a list box. Now we've declared 2 variables here. We've declared list box item of type TListBoxItem and the message Twitcher. First we create the list box item with the owner of self, and then we create the form with the owner of the list box item. The reason why we set the owner to the list box item is that when we free the list box item, the form will automatically be freed. We set the height to be 150, but we can set whatever additional styling we want to the list box item. We can apply certain styles, we can set fonts, we can add text, we can do whatever we need. Finally, we assign the parent. So we set the parent of the PNL message to the list box item. And lastly, we add the object of the list box item to the list box. For the clear list box, we take in a list box, a type T list box, and then we simply loop the list box until there's no more items and we free the first item. Now notice how I'm using item by index instead of items. If I were to go listbox.items, it would return T strings, and that's not what we want. What we want is to go item by index, because that will return the T list box item that we need to handle. Now this third procedure that we haven't handled yet is populate item text. What this does is it takes in the title, the body, and the time, and then we'll populate the title field, the body field, and the time field inside of the list box item. Now, because we're dealing with a T-list box item and not the form, there's no real way that this form is really aware of what's in the form Twitcher message. So all we need to do is set the bindings of the text box, of the t-text inside inside this form. So we simply select this and we set the binding name. We'll set this to title. Set the binding name of this to time, and we set the binding name of this to body. So when we do item.findBinding and we pass in title as a string, it will search all the bindings within that list box item for title, and that it will return that as a T object, and then we cast it to T text. This doesn't handle handling and all that, so be sure to make sure you know that it's a T text before you go and cast it, otherwise you run into application exceptions. So we assign the title to the title binding, we set the body to the body binding, and we set the time to the time binding. Pretty simple. So here, when we add the item to list, we will, after we set the height, we will add some text here. We'll pass in our new list box item, and then we'll pass in, as the title, we will pass in, we'll pass in the string to int, we'll pass in the count of the list box at that point in time. And +1 because at that point we haven't added it yet. And we'll add some random text for the body, and then we'll set the time as now. Now, when we run this, and we figure out these errors, the reason why we get an exception here is because we haven't assigned the parent of the message rectangle to the list box item. If we were to flip this around, assign the parent, before we populate the text, it would work as expected. This demonstration shows how easy it is to take your 2D application built in FireMonkey and bring it into a 3D environment. So we'll take our previous Twitcher example and we will import it into our new 3D application. So we are going to start a new FireMonkey 3D application. So to start, we have this nice 3D space where we can create rectangle 3Ds. move around left and right. We got our angles here. And we can set our pitch like that, and then we can go like that, and then we can readjust the size like this. It's pretty cool. Like so. Anyway, very flexible. Just so you know, you can hold Control and then you can move your mouse up and down to set your Z position. Alright, so that's pretty basic manipulation of 3D objects. I'm sure there will be other sessions that will cover that. However, this will cover taking a 2D form and putting it into a 3D space, which usually consists of flat rectangles. So in 3D, we will cover a component called T-Layer 3D. And what this is a component that contains a 2D form. So it looks just like a rectangle. You got all of your handles here, but you can take this layer 3D and then you can add a button to it, and then it will appear inside that layer, which is really cool. And then I can actually copy this and paste it, and I have 2 of them. Super simple. So I have one closer, one further, type of thing. I can have it angled like that, just like so. So this is really cool. You can create forms in 3D space, but it isn't exactly intuitive, because you have to bring it close and you have to make sure everything's all aligned properly, and it's just not intuitive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our form that we built in the 2D application and we're going to bring it into here. So it's really simple. So first we're going to delete these 2. We're going to create another T-Layer 3D. Alright, so here we go, and now we will add our other form to this project. So we'll add both of them, just like so. Alright, so here's our old message form, and then we have the other message list form. If you recall, this is from before. Alright, so what we do is first we have to add the forms, of course, to the uses clause of this unit. The correct unit, how about? So we got form, twitcher, message, and we got form, twitcher, message, list. Save, or to autocomplete, and then it should times, but I'm sure we will just press this once. So when I press this button, it instantly shows up in the T panel, T-Layer 3D at the top left. So now that's easy, but it's still pretty manual, and I got to manually position it. I got to make sure everything's perfect, and it's just not clean. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what we discussed before and move it into a concave user interface. I have developed a method that takes in several parameters. I'm just getting that now. And here it comes. It's a fairly simple method. There we go. And what it does is that it takes in the item ID, which is if you're to have an array of layer 3Ds, you'd specify which one you're talking about. The item ID, the length, the width of the scene, the number of columns that you want to have per row, the position of the panel, the layer 3D, the X, Y, and the Z, and the width, the height, and the Y rotation of the layer 3D. So just to illustrate this, we're going to have our 2 panels here. One's over here, one's down there. And we're going to call 3D set 3D grid position when I press this button here. So I'm not going to create this anymore. So I'm going to comment this. So we're going to call it 3D set position. We're going to pass in the item ID 0, scene width, self.width. A number of columns, we will have 2 columns. Item position. Now here we pass in the layer 3D's position. It takes in the T position 3D. And we pass in item width, item height, and item Y rotation by variable, so by reference. So I'm going to have to declare these. I'm just simply going to pass them in. Make sure that compiles, everything's good. Alright, then afterwards I'm going to set the parent.width equals item width height equals item height, and dot rotation angle dot y, which is the left and right rotation, equals item y rotation. So we're just going to set one of them. It would then be on the right side. There we go. So now we have a nice interface. Now I could maybe refactor this so that I can even create these layers on the fly, and then have our different forms, put it in here. I could have multiple. It's quite amazing. So I could take this, copy it again, right? Copy it again. Copy it again. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 4 panels now. And I can probably create a new procedure that takes in .set panel position, that takes in the layer 3D, and takes in the item index. So instead of recopying the code and duplicating my code, I am simply creating a simple method that takes care of that for me. So all I have to do is call the set panel position. So instead of panel button position, I'll just set this, and then set that. And instead of hard coding the position or the index, I'll be passing an item index. Alright. So I can call this. Now I have it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. P&L button, which is of index 0. Oops. P&L parent, which we will now make index of 1. Layer 3D 1, index of 2, and that is an index of 3, and there we go. Right, I press the button, and presto, automatically. So notice how when I move this to the right, it kind of doesn't go with it. So simple enough. On the resize, I will simply recall those methods. So I'm actually going to create a new function called setPositions, which simply calls that. So if we were to start the application and press the button, it will set the angles and the positioning correctly. However, if I were to resize, it automatically sets the angle and the position and the height correctly. I plan to release that code for people to download and check out. So take a look at learndelphi.com for more information. So we've taken our application, we've taken it from a 2D HD application and we moved it to the 3D space. Now it's fantastic. We add real estate, perfect for those monitoring situations. But what if you were to, let's say, deploy to a client and they don't want it to just be there, they want it to float around, or they want it to move to their different positions, not so harshly like it is now. Well, with FireMonkey, it's super simple. Like, it's ridiculously simple. I could go on for hours saying how simple it is. Did I mention it is simple? So, I'll show you how simple it is. Right now we are setting the rotation angle of the result from the set3D grid position function, and we're assigning it to Y. To change it to a animation, you simply comment out the old, and then you go animate float. That's simple. It's simple. So then we take our property, we pass it in as a string, rotation angle.y. We pass it in as a string. If you're dealing with subproperties, you must include the full path, starting with the components. So if we're going panel.rotationangle.y or position.x or scale.y and x, you have to put the full path in there. So rotation.angle.y, we'll set the new value to our item y rotation, and we'll leave the rest of the parameters as is. And we'll maybe increase the duration just a little bit. We'll put it to 2 seconds just to make this more noticeable. So I moved a little bit fast so you didn't notice it. So I'm just going to push the button here, and it animates wonderfully. Do it again. So that's pretty cool, but it's still pretty stiff. It's like pretty good, but it could just be a little bit more. We can maybe make it bounce a little bit, or make it look like it's pages, right? So we're going to make it look like pages, and I'll show you how simple it is. If you want to see the full list of animation kinds, of the interpolations and the animation types, all you have to do is put down an animation component somewhere and then just browse through it, and we're going to go through that right now. So we're going to take our T button and we're going to add an animation. T animate. T float animation. We're not going to put an animation on the button or anything, but we're just going to browse through the components here. So we got our property name, and it's got a whole bunch of different properties that it knows off the bat. Start value, stop value. But what we're looking at is the interpolation. So we have a whole bunch here. We got back, we got bounce, circular, cubic, elastic, exponential, linear, quadratic, quartic, quintic, and sinusoidal. The quadratic, quartic, and quintic, they're pretty much the same thing. You can imagine, it's kind of like a curve going up, except the quadratic's going up, and then the quintic is going up, but a lot quicker. But the circular, the bounce, the elastic, the linear, and the sinusoidal are pretty unique. And so what you got to do is you just got to go and test them out. You got to get a feel for it. And then when you start developing your user interfaces, you'll just know what fits. For example, if you were to have a disk and then you want to have it spin, you'd set it to sinusoidal, and then it would go in a circle. Or you can go linear, and then it'll go in a circle pretty straight. But if you wanted to have rotation with a bit of a bounce at the end, then you'd have bounce, right? So you just got to experiment. I guess I could demonstrate this just a little bit by having this float animation here, and then we'll set the interpolation to bounce. We'll set the property name to rotation angle, and because it's a 2D component on a 2D form, we don't have to deal with the Z layer, the Z coordinates. We're just dealing with simple rotation angle. I start from 0, stop at 360, so we're going around in a circle. And we set the delay that, and we'll set no delay, 2 seconds, going a little slow, and we enable it. And I believe that's all we need to do, and it should just go and spin. Yeah. And notice that it stopped once, so we can actually tell this to keep going forever and ever. So all we have to do is select the float animation here, and then set it to loop. And what that'll do is that it will not just complete once, but complete it over and over again. Like that. Now if we wanted the animation to work the other way, all we have to do is set the inverse to true. And it will work the other way. Now, if we wanted it to go forward and then go back to the first frame of the animation, so go to the end, then go to the beginning, and then go back and forth, what we do is we set the auto reverse flag. So it will go forward, and then it will go back. Then go forward, and then it will go back and forth. Kind of cute. So, where were we? I kind of went off track with the animations. Animations are so much fun. Oh yes, we were going through the different animation types. That's bounce. So, we'll go delete this now. We know that we're going to use bounce. So, pretty simple. Animation type, we'll leave it as ATN. And then interpolation type we will call IT bounce. And when I attempt to recompile, you'll notice that it doesn't work because we haven't used the fully qualified type here. So we have to go T animation type dot ATIN. So T animation type dot. That's something new for FireMonkey. You didn't have to worry about it in VCL. However, to make sure that we don't have enumerated types conflicting with each other, we have to put the full name in there. And this is the T interpolation type. Dot IT bounce. If you're doing it, if you're familiar with C#, this is nothing new. However, for Delphi users, this is new. So when we recompile it and we push the button, we'll have a nice bouncy animation to our angle. It's pretty cool. So you can do this for just about any floating point property. You'll notice that there's some other animations such as animate color, float delay, float weight. Float delay is the same thing as float, except you get an additional property that allows you to set the delay. So if you wanted it to be delayed just by a little bit, you could do that. So we could actually wherever this is. Yeah, there it is. We can go random range, and we can go from 1 to 2. I'll go 1 to 4. Of course, we have to put math in here. So when we compile this and we push the button, we notice that at random intervals, the different panels go and do the animation to go to their final rotation angle, which is really nice. It adds a great effect. I suggest doing that if you're to do animations across multiple items, because it gives an additional life effect to your application. It gives a little bit of personality instead of the strict one position to another position all at the same time. It just adds that additional touch that really brings your application out. When developing your application, you must keep the user experience in mind to ensure a high user productivity. I have determined 3 core considerations when developing for your users. You must reduce the skill required, reduce the information overload, and reduce the user interruptions within your application. By reducing the skill required to operate your application, you can directly reduce the learning and training required. To reduce the skill required to operate your application, I suggest using common elements between your application and the environment around it. For example, developing your own navigation workflow may provide users a new and intuitive way to navigate the application, but little to no knowledge is transferred from the user's previous experience with other applications. As a result, the user's productivity is inhibited by learning a foreign navigation system. I also suggest keeping a consistent experience throughout the application, so that the user does not have to learn different ways to operate your application when using different features. The user should be guided through the process workflow using visual aids, so that the user remains efficient at entering data without referring to documents for next steps. Finally, the application should allow simple and easy-to-follow guides for novices, but allow more experienced users the freedom to access more productive features. As an example, you could provide a simple wizard-based data entry for novice users, but provide experienced users with an overview-like view with additional shortcuts to access more complicated functionality. Information overload is a concern for enterprise because the user loses productivity when the user is unable to determine the important pieces of information to base their decisions on. To reduce this, simply hide elements that are not required for the users, such as hiding extra contact information unless invoked or required, or hiding menus or buttons that the user doesn't have authorization to access. Allowing drill-down functionality will commonly provide the user all the information they need to make a decision. Interruptions are always a concern in an enterprise environment. The source of it, in many cases, are the application. A simple interruption can disrupt the user's train of thought, forcing the user to refocus, increasing the chance of being distracted, resulting in a measurable loss of productivity. Some examples of an interruption include modal dialogues when mistyping or skipping a required entry, or waiting excessively for a process to finish. To reduce interruptions when entering data, use passive notification when filling in a form. If the passive notifications are still outstanding when a form is submitted, simply show a summary of all the passive notifications in a modal dialogue. In cases where the user must make a decision before continuing with their data entry, a modal dialogue can still be used. User interruptions may also be a result from the user's lack of skill to operate your application, or from information overload. So, to ensure a positive user experience, all 3 points must be considered when designing your application. FireMonkey is a rich application platform. As a result, you have the power to create stunning applications that the user instinctively knows how to navigate, or create a foreign experience that will actually reduce the user's productivity. With power comes responsibility. Thank you for listening in.